A judge tries to frame a simple woman, not knowing she's a legal genius. The entire courthouse falls silent as Judge Vincent Clark's voice thunders through the marble halls. Ms. Ross, you have 24 hours to locate that missing file before I file formal negligence charges. Perhaps then you'll understand the consequences of incompetence in my courtroom. Maria Ross stands perfectly still, her face a mask of composure despite the public humiliation. 15 years as a court clerk, and not once has a document gone missing under her watch. She knows exactly where that file is, or rather, who took it. The same man now threatening to destroy her career. What Judge Clark doesn't realize is that the quiet, unassuming woman he's targeting isn't just a clerk. Behind her modest clothes and gentle demeanor lies a mind that can recite state statutes from memory and spot procedural violations others miss. A woman who earned her law degree through night classes while raising a son alone and caring for aging parents. A woman who knows the system better than those who run it. Have you ever been underestimated simply because of who you are? Have you felt the sting of watching someone with less skill but more status take credit for your work? If so, this story might feel familiar. Drop a heart in the comments if you've ever had to prove your worth to someone who refused to see it. Maria returns to her desk, hands trembling slightly as she unlocks her drawer. Inside is a small notebook, one of dozens she's filled over the years. Each documents discrepancies, favoritism, and procedural oversights in Judge Clark's courtroom. She's been watching, waiting, documenting. Now, she'll have to decide if she's ready for the cost of standing up to power. This is not a story about revenge. It's about dignity, integrity, and the quiet strength it takes to protect justice when those sworn to uphold it fail. This is about a woman who refuses to be erased. Maria grew up watching her immigrant parents work themselves to exhaustion in their small Rust Belt town. Her father in construction, her mother cleaning houses for wealthy families. They spoke limited English but knew enough to tell her repeatedly, "Education is the one thing no one can take from you." While other children played after school, Maria translated legal notices, utility bills, and insurance forms for her parents and their friends. By 16, she could navigate bureaucratic systems better than most adults. By 24, she had a paralegal certificate and a job in the county courthouse. By 26, she had a husband, a son, and dreams of law school that seemed far away but possible. Then came her husband's diagnosis. Cancer, aggressive and unforgiving. Maria spent the next year in hospitals rather than classrooms, holding his hand as he faded. At 28, she became a widow with a 7-year-old son and aging parents who needed her more than ever. Law school shifted from a dream to a distant star, visible but unreachable. Yet Maria refused to let it disappear entirely. She took one-night class each semester at the community college. She studied during lunch breaks and after her son fell asleep. 10 years of relentless determination. One foot in front of the other when quitting would have been easier. The day she passed the bar exam, there was no champagne celebration, no job offers from prestigious firms. Just a quiet dinner with her son, now in high school, and her parents whose proud tears said more than words could. But Maria never practiced law. Her clerk position provided stability, benefits, predictable hours that allowed her to care for her family. And in truth, the courthouse had become home, a place where she understood every filing system, every procedural nuance, every shortcut and workaround. New attorneys often came to her desk with confused expressions, legal questions disguised as procedural ones. Judges, even Clark, relied on her efficiency while treating her as little more than office furniture. Maria took pride in her work even when others didn't recognize its value. "You're the heart of this place," Adrian Ricks, the court reporter, told her once. "They just don't know it yet." Adrian was one of the few who saw Maria clearly. After 20 years recording testimonies, objections, and verdicts, he'd developed an almost supernatural ability to disappear in plain sight, observing everything while being observed by no one. His stenographer's fingers documented truth while his eyes catalogued the human dramas unfolding daily in the courthouse. In contrast to Maria and Adrian stood Judge Vincent Clark, third-generation jurist, graduate of elite schools, member of clubs where membership costs more than Maria's annual salary. His family name adorned a courthouse wing, donated by his grandfather. His father's portrait hung in the main hall, a reminder of the Clark legacy. What few knew was how heavily that legacy weighed on Vincent. The quiet comparisons, the subtle suggestions that perhaps he hadn't quite lived up to the family standard. His father had been appointed to the federal bench at 42. Vincent, at 58, remained a county judge despite extensive political maneuvering. This sense of grievance manifested in his courtroom demeanor, particularly toward those he perceived as beneath him: court clerks, public defenders, defendants from the wrong neighborhoods, and especially women who showed any hint of challenging his authority. Laura Armstrong experienced this firsthand daily. As a public defender, she represented clients Judge Clark seemed to have decided were guilty before they entered his courtroom. Laura fought anyway, presenting meticulous arguments while weathering Clark's sighs, interruptions, and barely concealed contempt. "Motion denied, Ms. Armstrong. Perhaps you could better serve your clients by encouraging them to accept the generous plea deals offered, rather than wasting the court's valuable time." Laura would clench her jaw, nod respectfully, and continue fighting. She chose this career after watching her own brother receive a harsh sentence for a minor drug offense, a sentence that derailed his education, employment prospects, and mental health. She promised herself she would be the advocate he never had. Maria watched this dynamic play out daily, documenting it in her notebooks. She noted which attorneys received favorable treatment, those who contributed to Clark's re-election campaigns, which defendants received harsher sentences, young men of color particularly, and which procedural objections Clark sustained or overruled, revealing clear patterns of bias. Then came the Rosenberg case. The defendant, Tyler Rosenberg, was the son of one of the county's largest real estate developers, and a significant donor to Clark's campaigns. The charges were serious: drunk driving resulting in injury. The evidence was clear: blood alcohol levels twice the legal limit, multiple witnesses, video from the bar showing him being escorted to his car despite visible intoxication. Yet Judge Clark dismissed the case on a minor technicality, a clerical error in how the evidence was logged. An error no judge would normally consider sufficient for dismissal. Maria processed the dismissal paperwork as required, but she also did something else. She ensured all evidence was properly catalogued and preserved rather than destroyed, a technical oversight that would later prove significant. She did this not out of malice toward Clark, but from professional commitment to proper procedure. 2 weeks later, the victim's family filed an appeal, requesting the evidence be reviewed. When Clark learned that all evidence remained intact and properly documented, evidence that clearly showed his dismissal was improper, he called Maria to his chambers. "Who authorized you to preserve that evidence?" His voice was quiet but laced with fury. "Standard procedure requires." "Standard procedure follows my direction," he interrupted. "I am this court. Do you understand?" Maria nodded, heart racing but expression neutral, a skill perfected over years of hiding her thoughts from those who underestimated her. That afternoon, a crucial file disappeared from the records room, documentation of another questionable ruling in a case involving a Clark family associate. By morning, Clark had publicly accused Maria of either negligence or deliberate sabotage. 24 hours, Ms. Ross," he announced before a lobby full of attorneys, staff, and curious onlookers. "Find that file or face consequences." Maria knew she was being set up. The missing file contained evidence of a pattern that, combined with the Rosenberg case, might suggest corruption rather than isolated poor judgment. That night, Maria sat at her kitchen table long after her son had gone to bed. Her hands trembled as she reviewed her options. Report Clark. To whom? His colleagues on the bench. The State Bar Association dominated by men from the same social circles. The court administrator who owed his position to Clark's recommendation. She could resign, find another job without the daily stress of walking on eggshells around a vindictive judge. But jobs with her salary and benefits were scarce in their small city, especially for a woman without prestigious connections. And resignation would allow Clark's behavior to continue unchecked, affecting countless defendants who lacked the resources or knowledge to fight back. As dawn broke, Maria made her decision. She would not run. She would not break. Instead, she would use her greatest strength, her detailed knowledge of the legal system, as both shield and sword. Have you ever reached that moment where you chose to stand your ground, even knowing the cost might be tremendous? What gave you the courage? Share your story in the comments below. Maria began by creating a documentation system Clark couldn't dismantle. She established triple redundancies for all case files in his courtroom: one official copy, one digital backup accessible only with her encrypted password, and one physical copy stored off-site. Each document received a digital timestamp and authentication code. Next, she reached out to Laura Armstrong, ostensibly to streamline filing procedures for public defender cases. In reality, she was creating an ally, someone who could witness and independently verify court proceedings if needed. These new procedures should help prevent files from disappearing, Maria explained, emphasizing the word just slightly. Laura caught her meaning immediately. How long has this been happening? Long enough, Maria replied. But it stops now. Adrian Ricks joined their unofficial alliance without a single explicit conversation. He simply began providing Maria with unofficial transcripts of Clark's more problematic proceedings, left in unmarked envelopes on her desk. She would nod when they passed in hallways, their only acknowledgement of shared purpose. Maria also began speaking up in staff meetings, gently at first, then with growing confidence. She proposed procedural improvements, citing relevant legal statutes by memory. She corrected inaccurate statements with a respectful, actually, according to State Code Section 15.8. She positioned herself not as challenging authority but as protecting the court's integrity. Some colleagues avoided her, sensing she had become radioactive in Clark's eyes. Others watched with quiet admiration. A few began their own subtle acts of resistance: small corrections, careful documentation, silent solidarity. As weeks passed, Clark's suspicion grew. Files no longer disappeared, making it harder to discredit Maria directly. Instead, he increased her workload to impossible levels, assigned her to the courthouse's basement records room, excluded her from staff meetings, and criticized her publicly for increasingly minor issues. "Your filing system has inconsistencies, Ms. Ross," he announced during a staff meeting she hadn't been invited to but attended anyway. "Perhaps spending more time on your actual job responsibilities and less on playing amateur lawyer would serve this court better." Maria met his gaze. "I'd be happy to explain the filing system improvements, Your Honor. They're actually based on the recommendations from the State Judicial Office's Best Practices Manual, page 47, if you'd like the reference." Clark's face flushed with anger at the subtle reminder that she knew her job better than he did. The room fell uncomfortably silent until Adrian changed the subject, but something had shifted. Maria had responded with respectful expertise rather than submission. That night, her teenage son noticed her unusual quiet during dinner. "What's wrong, Mom? Is it that judge again?" Maria considered deflecting but chose honesty instead. "Yes. Standing up to him is harder than I expected." "Is it worth it?" The question struck Maria deeply. Was it worth the stress, the isolation, the constant anxiety? She thought of the defendants who received harsher sentences based on Clark's biases rather than legal standards. She thought of her parents who had taught her that dignity mattered more than comfort. "Some things are worth doing not because they're easy, but because they're right," she finally answered. When you see something wrong happening and have the ability to address it, looking away becomes a choice too. Her son nodded thoughtfully. "Like that quote on your graduation diploma, the one about justice." Maria smiled. "Justice will not be served until those who are unaffected are as outraged as those who are." That conversation strengthened her resolve. The following week, a case came before Judge Clark that crystallized everything. The defendant was a young woman, Jessica Torres, arrested for protesting against a development project, a project owned by the same Rosenberg family whose son had walked free from drunk driving charges. Jessica faced excessive charges that could result in significant jail time for what was essentially peaceful assembly. In a pattern now familiar to Maria, Clark denied all of Laura Armstrong's motions and sustained every objection from the prosecution. He set bail far beyond Jessica's means despite her deep community ties and lack of criminal record. Maria processed the paperwork with her usual thoroughness, but this time she included complete documentation of the Rosenberg case alongside it, creating a clear side-by-side comparison of disparate treatment based on connections rather than law. Adrian's transcript captured Clark's biased language and procedural violations. Laura's motions documented the legal standards being ignored. Together, they created an undeniable pattern of judicial misconduct. That evening, Maria compiled 15 cases showing similar patterns. She organized them methodically, created a detailed index, added relevant legal statutes, and cited judicial ethics codes violated in each instance. She worked until midnight, checking every detail multiple times. This would be her stand. Not emotional accusations but indisputable evidence. The next morning, an anonymous package arrived at the State Judicial Review Board. No cover letter, no accusations, just meticulously organized documentation letting the facts speak for themselves. 3 days later, investigators arrived at the courthouse. They requested specific case files, the same ones documented in the package. They interviewed staff, observed procedures, and examined records. Through it all, Maria continued her daily work with calm efficiency, answering questions factually when asked but volunteering nothing. Clark, however, unraveled visibly. His hands trembled during hearings. He snapped at attorneys. His rulings became erratic. When investigators requested access to his chamber's computer, he exploded in rage, demanding to know who had reported him. He found Maria in the file room during lunch, organizing records with her habitual precision. "It was you, wasn't it?" he hissed, voice low but vibrating with anger. "You sent those files to the review board." Maria continued filing for a moment before turning to face him. The hallway had gone quiet, other staff watching from a distance. "Judge Clark, I've done exactly what my position requires, maintaining accurate records and following proper procedures. If those records reflect poorly on certain decisions, that's not a filing issue. You think you're clever, don't you? A night school lawyer playing at justice. You have no idea the connections I have, the people who owe me favors. When this farce of an investigation ends, you'll never work in any courthouse again." Maria met his gaze with unexpected steadiness. "Perhaps not. But I'll still be able to look in the mirror each morning." The confrontation was witnessed by several staff members, including Adrian and the court administrator. Clark's threats became part of the investigation record, further undermining his position. 2 weeks later, the Judicial Review Board announced formal proceedings against Judge Vincent Clark, citing substantial evidence of judicial misconduct and potential ethics violations. Clark was placed on administrative leave pending full review. What no one expected was Maria's response to the chaos that followed. Rather than seeking advancement in Clark's absence or accepting congratulations for her perceived role in his downfall, she simply continued her work with the same quiet diligence she had always shown. When offered a promotion to head court clerk, she declined. Instead, she accepted a part-time position teaching legal procedures at the community college where she had begun her own legal education years earlier. "The system works best when everyone understands it," she explained to Laura, who questioned her decision. "Not just attorneys and judges, but everyone who interacts with the courts." Her first class included legal secretaries seeking advancement, community activists wanting to understand their rights, and immigrants navigating unfamiliar systems. People like her parents, seeking the knowledge that no one could take from them. On her classroom wall hung a framed copy of the procedural manual she had written, now officially adopted by the county court system. Not her law degree or bar certification, though she had earned both. The manual represented what Maria valued most, making justice accessible to everyone, regardless of status or background. Judge Clark avoided criminal charges. His family connections still powerful enough for that mercy. He retired quietly to Florida. His reputation diminished but his freedom and pension intact. Maria never spoke his name in public again, neither in accusation nor in triumph. His role in her story had ended. Her own continued. Adrian still worked as court reporter, now documenting proceedings under judges who knew their words and actions were being carefully recorded. Laura found her public defender clients receiving fairer hearings, their motions considered on legal merit rather than dismissed reflexively. Most significantly, other court staff throughout the system had witnessed something powerful, that integrity, knowledge, and quiet persistence could effectively challenge power when wielded with precision and patience. Maria's son, now in college studying social justice, once asked if she regretted not practicing law formally after working so hard for her degree. "I've practiced law every day," she answered. "Just not in the way I originally imagined." And that was true. Maria had defended justice not through dramatic courtroom arguments but through meticulous documentation, procedural correctness, and unwavering ethical standards. Her battlefield had been filing systems and timestamp protocols rather than jury addresses and cross-examinations. Her victories came not with gavels and verdicts but with systems that worked equally for everyone who entered the courthouse doors. One afternoon, months after Clark's departure, Maria was leaving the courthouse when she encountered Jessica Torres, the young protester whose case had been the final catalyst. Since Clark's removal, the excessive charges against her had been reduced to a minor citation. "Ms. Ross," Jessica called out, "I wanted to thank you. My lawyer told me what you did. How you created a system that made it impossible for records to disappear." Maria smiled gently. "I just did my job." "No," Jessica replied. "You did justice. There's a difference." As Maria walked to her car, she reflected on that distinction. Justice wasn't always dramatic confrontations and eloquent speeches. Sometimes it was careful documentation and triple backups. Sometimes it was showing up every day and doing the right thing, even when no one was watching, especially when no one was watching. She thought of her parents, who had taught her that dignity wasn't something others could grant or take away. It came from within. She thought of her son, learning that standing up for what's right has costs but brings peace that compliance never could. She thought of all the courthouse staff who had found their own small ways to ensure fairness in a system that often favored power over justice. These quiet revolutions, individual choices to uphold integrity even when easier paths existed, these were how systems ultimately changed. Not all at once in dramatic overhauls, but day by day, choice by choice, person by person, until doing the right thing became the expected standard rather than the surprising exception. Maria's story didn't end with vanquishing a corrupt judge. It continued in classrooms where she taught others to navigate legal systems with knowledge and confidence. It continued in procedures that made justice more accessible to everyone. It continued in the lives of those who witnessed her quiet strength and found courage for their own stands. Like and subscribe if you believe in the power of dignity and quiet strength. Share in the comments a time when you stood up for what was right even when it wasn't easy. And don't forget to hit that notification bell for more stories that remind us that the most powerful transformations often begin with the simplest choice. To do what's right because it's right, regardless of who notices.